Joining us from our Cape Town studio now to have a look at what's happening in the trade and industry sector of our economy is the Minister of Trade and Industry himself, Rob Davies. Minister, thank you for joining us. We sit in the studio regularly hearing of companies that are leaving South Africa, that are taking their capital and investing it elsewhere. They continue to say that there's something going wrong within our country, and it is reminiscent to some of them of what happened in the 1980s when we had divestment. So sometimes there's miscommunication, and that's why we're really glad to have you in studio to help us through here, and perhaps to give some of our studio guests a more positive outlook in future. But this movement that we're seeing from many companies of South African origin out of the country, is it something that is starting to concern you?
Well, I think we've seen some of this in the past. I mean, right in the 1990s, there were a number of companies that moved their headquarters offshore, said they were going global, were restructuring themselves in this way. Maybe some of them are now trying to develop a new narrative around some negativity about the South African economy. But I can say that against that, we have Trade and Investment South Africa, which is a division of the Department of Trade and Industry, which deals with foreign investors' potential as well as actual. While you don't have to go through trade and investment, many do, and the pipeline which they're servicing of 60.5 billion is remaining solid and has grown since last year. So I think that we are seeing a number of international companies that see the Africa story as positive, recognize Africa's ambition to industrialize, see that South Africa is the most industrialized country on the continent, and also recognize a number of the benefits for operating from South Africa elsewhere on the continent. So the pipeline that we are continuing to service remains actually quite solid and robust, despite a number of the challenges and the things that are in the news from day to day.
Yesterday we heard AngloGold Ashanti, such a South African company, that they wouldn't even move out of the downtown Johannesburg, saying they're splitting, they're going to put their South African assets in one pot. We had BHP Billiton, and we know their history. They've halved off their South African assets as well. Goldfields before them. Those are bigger than 60 billion that is moving away from us. And I guess maybe you can give us some insight into behind closed doors, because we don't always get to understand what you're seeing.
Well, I think that one of the things that we've got is we've got a serious challenge in mining. And that's got a number of causes. It's not just strikes. I mean, I think strikes are caused by other things. One of them is that we've got a reality which we better confront as a country, that the commodity super cycle, which we benefited from for a number of years, and which was one of the factors that helped us insulate ourselves from the recession, actually passed its peak in 2012. So I think that the future of digging dirt out of the ground and exporting it to other countries is not quite as rosy as it was a few years ago. I think that's part of the story, perhaps. On top of that, I think we've got some very serious labor relations and community issues in mining areas, which I think we're all familiar with, overlaid by a very, very high indebtedness problem. This is something that falls into our court through the National Credit Regulator, which reports to myself. And I think we are very well aware that there's a very high level of indebtedness, partly caused by institutions in the micro-lending space that have been targeting low-income people, and I think with very unsustainable growth models. So I think those are the challenges. But our future lies in moving up the value chain, in industrializing, even using our mineral resources as a competitive advantage for manufacturing. That's part of our Industrial Policy Action Plan. So what I'm seeing that in the place I operate within, which is fundamentally industrial and manufacturing space, I'm still seeing that there is a positive investment response in this country, still coming from domestic, but also from foreign investors. And just recently I went around at least one factory in the clothing sector, which was our most vulnerable sector, which was bleeding fast. And I think we're seeing stabilization, but also growth of sectors like footwear. And I think that if we can do it in some of those sectors, we can do it across the board. We can do it in the metal industries. We can do it in agro-processing. And we certainly are making progress in the auto sector as well.
glad you brought up the metals industry, because one of our recent invitees was the CEO of Invicta, who says that they have a policy to get 50% of their revenues from outside of South Africa as soon as possible, and he used the metal industry strike as one of the reasons for it. Is there any light at the end of that particularly dark tunnel with the labour unrest there?
Well, I think we had one abnormal strike in South Africa, a 5-month strike in the platinum sector. And we've had other strikes, but I think, for example, the strike in the metal sector was not an extraordinary strike. We are a country with labour rights. We are working to try to encourage a more constructive environment of social dialogue and collective bargaining. We're trying to do that as government. We have, for example, in the motor industry, we've introduced a competitiveness structure which is dealing with trying to raise competitiveness, and unions and government, as well as the automotive sector, are working together on that. So I think we're trying to work to improve the climate, but look, we're not going to be a country that doesn't have any strikes. It's part of the reality. It's part of the reality that we've had, well, since the dawn of democracy and even before that. So I don't think we want to pretend that we're not something that is other than we are. But as I said, I think we have an extraordinary set of circumstances in the mining sector, which we are grappling with as a government.
I know you do attend the World Economic Forum in Davos, and you know what good work they do on a wide range of fronts. 144 out of 144, now not just for the education structure in South Africa, but for the labour relations issues. That is surely crisis, and something that I'm sure is occupying your mind. Is there anything within cabinet that you guys are working out that you can A, address the perceived, if not real, issue there, and B, to change the ranking on that World Competitiveness Report?
Well, I think the WEF's World Competitiveness Report is just one way of assessing competitiveness. There are a number of others. Many of our incentive schemes as the DTI are in fact intended to address raising competitiveness. Some of the successes we've had in the clothing sector were because we changed our incentive to support competitiveness raising. We only actually provide financial support when companies are involved in competitiveness raising. One of our most important generic programs is called the Manufacturing Competitiveness Enhancement Program, which does the same more generically. But I think what we're trying to do in the labour relations front is we're trying to improve the climate for collective bargaining and for social dialogue, both of those things. The Deputy President was at the National Economic and Labour Council, NEDLAC, the other day. And I think that what he was pointing out there, and by his presence there, he was saying that this is an important body of social dialogue. It must discuss some of the very important issues like a minimum wage, which is not going to be an easy matter to come to a consensus on. But the only way that we are actually going to solve our problems as South Africans is to come together and to reach consensus on matters. Collective bargaining, social dialogue, this is the only way we can go in South Africa. We are not a dictatorship. We can never go there. And I think we have to have inclusive growth, and growth that is seen to be benefiting all people that are in our country.
When we started this conversation, Minister, you said that the narrative was being used by businesses that might not be reflecting the real reasons why they and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but perhaps it's not the real reasons why they are expanding into other geographies. But that same narrative we get here on the program is that our government is anti-business and that the Nigerian government is pro-business. Now, I'm sure you would have got that kind of comment to deal with at least once. How do you respond?
Well, I don't think that's the case at all. I think that one of the things that I travel quite a bit, evidently. The last place I went to was, for example, the United States. When I talk to investors in the United States, of course, they have issues they want to raise with us and concerns they may have with us. But actually, the sort of negativity that we get from South Africa is quite extraordinary and quite often is not replicated. You talk about the WEF. I was fielding questions back in the year after Marikana from the South African press. Was I going to be confronted with a string of foreign investors all telling us they were going to leave our shores? And in fact, it was not the case. Many of them were raising quite sector-specific issues, challenges, how we could work together and things like that. So I think that government, I don't believe, is not involved in trying to support business. The department that I've been involved in has a very extensive set of engagements with business in the manufacturing space. What we do is we offer very attractive incentive programs to support business. We try to engage with business, but particularly manufacturers, because I think that, just to repeat what I said earlier on, the future of this country and the African continent is to move up the value chain and to industrialize. That's the challenge that we've got to face. And it may mean that we have to be quite tough on sections of business that are happy with the status quo or want to import, don't like localization, don't like some of the decisions we've taken on trade policy matters or tariffs, but we take them in the interest of supporting manufacturing. And I think we're unashamed about that.
Rob Davies, the Minister of Trade and Industry in South Africa, giving the other side of the equation, if you like, to some of that pretty harsh criticism that we've had on this program of late. And, well, it's nice. I can't wait to speak to David Shapiro next time around. I think that Rob Davies is measured and gives his point of view in a way that we can all understand where he's coming from.